How's it going, YouTube? Coming to you today with another video, and today, guys, the bring to you is going to be the budget decks for the format. Now, these are only a few, and maybe I'll make a more extensive guide, but there's going to be quite a few to look at here, and I really do hope that this helps you because of the fact that the format is really expensive. There's a lot of very expensive cards out there, like Impulse. We have both Molcharmies, and it can just be a lot. So I want to make sure that you know your options going into the format. And I know one of the deck lists have Thrust in them, and I think Thrust are only like 30s now. Maybe they're a little bit higher. I'm still trying to stay on the side of like no Molcharmies or Impulses or things like that too. So these are still cards that I would consider staples, the cards that you should already have, but I understand that not everyone will have them. So if there is something to sub out, that would be like Thrust in the one deck list that you'll see. I'll bring it up. But other than that, they're all relatively cheap. So just kind of take that with a grain of salt whenever you're looking at them, because these decks unanimously are pretty cheap compared to the rest of the format. So I do hope that this helps you, or at least gives you an idea of where to go with the format. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, RW, or Grimoire, definitely go ahead and check them all out down below in the description. Join my Discord, follow my Twitch and my Twitter, and let's hop right into the video. So the first one here is Pearly. Now, I like Pearly a lot. I think Pearly is a very cool deck. It does lose pretty hard to Impulse, and it loses pretty hard to Fualos, but you can still get a couple summons out without giving your opponent too many cards. Impulse is going to be the real kicker against this matchup, which does suck, but we do have a lot of cards that you can use to counter that, or at least put your opponent at a disadvantage for a turn or two. So the first deck list I'm going to show you is going to be my cat toy one. This is really cool. I love this deck list because of the fact that you are able to play things like Orange Light. You have the Fluffle Draw Engine, the normal summon of the Dolphin to be able to get back the Toy Vendor. You draw like 2 or 3 times and search 2 or 3 times, so your hand's gigantic when you do this. Droll is nice right now. It's not like super popular. It's around, but you can still get away with some cool things like this. But if you do get Impulsed, you do have cards like Shifter and Di-Fi, so you have a couple options. I also really would recommend playing Solemn Judgment right now, because a lot of times you're going to get Impulsed on the trap card. So if you have the Judgment for the Impulse when you flip Yeep, you're going to win the game probably. So that's one thing where I definitely would recommend, especially because, again, once you make that Noir, you're pretty much just gaming, right? So that's really important. But there is a lot of really cool opportunities with the deck list like this. This is just an idea and something that I thought was really fun, and it still is fun today. But let's talk about the deck list that we'll probably end up playing in a tournament setting. So now, this is the one that I would say that I'd probably bring to an event if I were to play this deck. So you're playing the standard engine of Pearly. You're only playing 2 of the Pearly. I don't think you need 3 of this one. I think playing 2 is perfectly fine. I still believe in playing 3 Pearly. I think that a lot of people cutting this card down to 2 are just incorrect. I think playing 3 is definitely correct because you want to be able to see this card as much as possible. You're also shiftering a lot in this deck, and so you want to make sure that you have access to cats when you can't just yeep them back. Playing Ogre, Ash, Imperm, Veiler, these are cards that we just want to be able to draw into. Of course, not the Imperm, but the others. But then Imperm is just generically very good. And then having the Cashier package is just another thing to really bump up the consistency of the deck, at least having some kind of an Envoid. And then Unicorn is still very scary right now. So I do like having these cards in the deck, not maxing out on them or anything crazy, but just having them around so you have another layer to your end board. Now, as for the sideboard, we do have Spear Mode. That's just something that you get to do for free in this deck, which is really nice, especially if you slap down like a Di-Fi, they are like, that's cool, and you go Spear Mode. It's rough. But then we still have Cosmic and Solemn. Like I said before, in my tier list, you can main deck Cosmic Cyclone. I think that's very strong right now, and you probably should. But in this build alone, I have it in the sideboard. If you do want to trade out the Imperms for the Cosmics, and just have Imperm for going second, because if you go first, it's not a good draw from Heat Soul, but a Cosmic would be. That is something that you can consider. I've done things like that before. I know in tournament I don't play hand traps, but I usually side into things like Nibiru Imperm, because I think that it's really underrated being able to do that going second. Pearly alone, I think, is going to be a really nice contender going into the format, especially if you have the things like Solemn Judgment to answer the cards like Impulse. The next deck here is going to be Mimig, another deck that has a huge problem with Impulse, and I would say even a worse problem with Impulse. your cards will not activate on your opponent's side of the board if they impulse you, which is really unfortunate. That alone, I've still seen a lot of the Mimigul decks doing pretty well. It also was, I believe, X1 of the case tourney over the weekend too. And, you know, that's one of the things where your opponent better see the impulse. And in the side, this is where I was talking about with things like Thrust. You could swap that out for Di-Fi and just run the Shifter and Di-Fi, because if they do impulse you, at least you can put up no graveyard, so your opponent can't really do much along the decks that usually are impulsing you, like Fire King. So you still have an option, you still have a line of play, which is nice. I think the deck itself is pretty crazy for what it can do, and I played against it myself, and, you know, this is something that the deck can go pretty wild. I personally like Thrust for DDG or T-Roar. I think T-Roar, a lot of people were asking me what T-Roar was the other day when I posted it. Threatening Roar is just really good against things like Tenpai. I won both my Tenpai matchups this weekend, and I T-Roared both of them, so it was broken. But having DDG is really nice too. Any way to just shut off the graveyard, especially if you're going to get impulsed. This is how we adapt. This is what I was talking about in my last video. If you are having any kind of issues with a certain card in a format, you need to make sure that you have a card that will equally deal with your opponent as much as that card's dealing with you. So shutting them off for their really popular resources, for them shutting you off of effects on their field, is going to be really, really important. Side note, I play this on DB. I give my opponent 2 monsters. They summon Empen on me. That was unfortunate, but still, that deck isn't real. Fluanderies is not real, but I still think that this deck has a lot of promise right now. It's very cool, and it's relatively cheap. The next one is going to be Ritual Beast. Now, I know that this deck can be a little bit higher, and Protoss is like 32, but I still think that there's a lot of promise in this deck, even if you want to play it more on a budget side of things. I think that even without Protoss, you're going to be fine. You want Protoss, for sure, but there are ways to make sure you can still do what you want to do. You still play Shifter. And then the other thing that I've not seen anyone doing, and I have no idea why, is you can play Harpy Conductor in your extra deck, summon it, and then you can activate Featherstorm from hand. So that's one thing that is really nice, and that could be like your Protoss substitute, right? Same with Thrust. You could always play something different, like a Di-Fi. That's like usually my main substitute in decks like this. But Featherstorm and Conductor, pretty strong. Or if you get like Pearly or Fawarost, you at least have an answer for your opponent, because you're not going to be able to play the game under a Featherstorm. So at that point, your opponent's just kind of dead. So that's one thing where if you do get into a situation where you have to adapt on the fly, if you have a card like Featherstorm, you do have a way to use it in this deck between just 2 wind monsters, which is pretty crazy. The next deck here is going to be the Millennium Exodia deck. Now, this is also relatively cheap, which I think is really cool. The deck's been seeing a lot of results lately, and it's very easy to pilot. It's just the big ol' punch deck. And, you know, we're playing Shifter in this one too. And, you know, I don't really think that this is going to take much effort to do well with if you're going to any kind of a tournament, and especially if you're even newer and you just want a new deck to kind of latch onto. This might not be that bad, to be honest with you. All of the YDKs are going to be in the description below as well if you want to copy these. I know that a lot of you might not know what all the cards are, so they will be individually labeled down below in the description. And I want to make sure that when I post budget decks as well, that they're competitively viable and they're maybe on the easier side to use, or not even like totally easy, but at least some of them are. This is one of them where I think the deck itself is very, very straightforward, and it has a very simple game plan. So that's one thing where if you want to pick up a deck right now and do fairly well with it, you can pick up something very nostalgic and then play not only Exodia in your deck, but the new Heart of the Blue Eyes, which is actually a pretty good card. So definitely a very cool deck, and, you know, I hope that you enjoy it. Now for the last one here, I have Kashtira. Kashtira has just really been this crazy deck that has went up and down, and it's really good, then it's really not, but you know, it's one of those things where I think the deck can still do fairly well. Shifter, Di-Fi, you see a little trend in all of these, right? But that's just kind of what budget decks are right now. It's the decks that play Shifter. But we are playing the Ogre Prep. 3 talent. I had the same motto for a long time where if you're going to be playing Kashtira, you always play through talent. It's just the best thing that you can do in this deck because it's so mid-rangey that you want to make sure that you have as much advantage over your opponent as possible. Shoutouts to my teammate Craig for talking about set rotation in Zombie World. I think that's pretty cool too, just because Zombie World does shut off quite a bit, including like the Fiendsmith cards. It shuts off things like Bell. It makes just so many different decks play very awkward, even the Tenpai deck, because they're no longer dragons. So that's definitely very cool and a really nice tech option. Playing the Judgments to make sure that your plays go through. We're playing the Blaze in the extra deck, the Gradio, and then the Heat Soul line. A lot of very cool tech cards here that will do very well moving forward. Now, if you did enjoy the video, subscribe to the channel. We're trying to hit 30,000 by the end of the year. I really do hope that you will have a wonderful day. I hope that you try out all these different builds, and let me know if they work out for you. I'd love to hear. But everyone have a great night, and catch you all in the next video. Thank you.